Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This video is for those of you who want to grow a small cutting garden for yourself next year. This could be anything from a couple of small pots to maybe a space in the ground in your small to average sized backyard. So I've compiled a list of some of my favorite cut flowers to use, and the first one I want to start with is a greenery or a filler, and my favorite pick is mint. Now, if this is a container garden we're talking about, mint is perfect because it does spread. You do not want to plant it in the ground. If we're talking in a broader term, there are a lot of herbs that you could use, and I'll give you a couple more in just a second. But with the mint, you can plant it in as big a pot as you like. It produces runners under the ground and will quickly, even if you start with one plant, it will quickly grow to fill that pot and give you lots of beautiful foliage to fill out your vases, your bouquets, whatever you're creating throughout the season. It is also very cold hardy. We are towards the end of November. Here in Eastern Canada, we have had nights well below freezing. -5 to 6 degrees Celsius we have seen so far, and the mint out there, while it is suffering, it is still usable and green. Other herbs that are really great to use are the flower heads of parsley, cilantro, oregano. Sage foliage is wonderful. French tarragon is also really wonderful. And on the annual side, this will not take a frost, but basil. Basil, you want to wait until it produces a flower spike, because if you cut it just for the foliage, it will almost certainly turn soft and wilt very quickly. So now we get into the flowers, and the very first thing on my list, because it will be the first thing that you get out of your garden in the spring, are spring bulbs. Now, we tend to think of our favorite spring bulbs as tulips and daffodils, but there are so many more that we could add to this list. A great choice is grape hyacinth or muscari, which tends to pop up just as early in the spring as the daffodils. And while most varieties aren't very tall, if you reach down to the bottom of the flowering stem and pull rather than cut, you will tend to get another 2 inches or so and give you a longer stem. And depending on where you live, if the ground hasn't frozen yet, it is not too late to get some fall bulbs if you can find them and get them into the ground before the ground freezes and it starts to snow. My second pick is snapdragons. I love growing snapdragons. They are one of my favorite flowers, not just in the cutting garden, but in the landscape as well. While we are down to less than 9 hours of daylight during the day, there is not much growth happening on anything right now. But the snapdragons I have growing in the yard, both my tall varieties for cutting and a few shorter ones in one of my borders, are still looking great and still flowering. And we have had those well below freezing nights for the last 6 weeks now. So they are still going, and it's only the lack of daylight that is slowing them down. We are zone 6 here, and some varieties even survive the winter as low as zone 4 or 5. The next one on my list is Rudbeckia, commonly known as black-eyed Susans, but there are lots of other varieties from the wild black-eyed Susans, which tend to give you sprays of smaller flowers, anywhere from 12 inches tall up to 3 feet or so. You can also get the cultivated varieties, which are 3 feet and taller, anything from the look of the classic black-eyed Susan, but much bigger bloom size, all the way up to the fancier double varieties that they sell for cutting. These are also really cold tolerant, and only over the last week or so, mid-November, did they start to succumb to the cold. I think when we hit -6 Celsius, they started to suffer a little bit. These, as well as the snapdragons, are both cut and come again, so they will give you multiple flushes of flowers throughout the season and keep going right up until the weather turns really cold. The last one on my list I have saved because it is the only one that will not take a frost, and this is zinnias. So if you live in a warmer climate or have anywhere in the 100 or more frost-free days, you can grow zinnias. You don't even have to start them indoors. They grow really, really fast. You can start those directly in the ground. Of course, starting them indoors does give them a really good head start. But just be ready, if you do start them in cells, be ready to pot them up. Sometimes I even will start mine in 3-inch pots just to be on the safe side. Zinnias will grow really quickly outdoors, direct seeded, especially if your soil temperature has warmed up. But once they get going, they're going to give you the most gorgeous flowers to bring in and add to your arrangements, as well as having a really long vase life as well. So those are my main picks. There really are endless amounts of flowers that you could use for cutting and bringing in, but those are the basic ones, in my opinion, that are fairly easy to start from seed, fairly easy to grow, and tend to do well in most soils as well. So a few things to consider when you are planning your cutting garden is choosing taller varieties, especially with things like Snapdragons. I have some that are only about 8 inches tall in one of my borders, and then I have ones closer to 3 feet in my cutting garden out back. Zinnias are the same. You can get really short border zinnias and really tall cutting zinnias. Mint is something that always tends to be fairly tall. With tulips and daffodils too, spring bulbs, you can get shorter varieties or taller varieties, but when you're looking at your packages of bulbs or seeds, that information is almost always listed somewhere. Anything really above a foot tall is something that you can work with, especially if you're just using these for your own enjoyment in your own house and not planning to sell them. For selling cut flowers, you're definitely looking somewhere in the above 2 feet range so that you have more stem length to work with. We already discussed that a lot of these, except the zinnias, are cold hardy, and that's really good for extending your season to get the most out of even a small cutting garden. The other criteria that I looked for, which I mentioned already, is that these are cut and come again plants. You can cut the flowers and they will continue to produce more. The exception, of course, being the spring bulbs, and most varieties will just give you one, although some will give you 2 or 3 blooms, or maybe a small spray of daffodils, for example, but usually within a couple of week window, and then they will definitely be done for the season. So if you would like some more detailed information on planting, growing, harvesting, and even vase life for these flowers, check out this video I did last spring on daffodils. That's a great one to start with because they are one of the first blooming cut flowers in the spring, and I will see you there. Thank you so much for watching.